Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. You are here for the Diversity and Racial Equality panel. To kick things off will be a presentation by Zhang Kagia. Do I always say your name correctly? I always try to. Okay, close. I have to practice that. Where he will go over some findings from a recent report from the Diversity in Cannabis, which was partnered with New Frontier Data and Women Grow. And I will turn this over to John as he kicks things off. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, Jay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
What a turnout and what a conference. Really want to just thank the team here at Yale for putting together not just the first business school organized cannabis business conference, but one of such extraordinary excellence. The caliber of speakers at this event have been terrific, and this is coming from somebody who spends a lot of time on the road at cannabis conferences. So for the students, I hope you appreciate that you're getting a master class in the cannabis industry. Now, as somebody who has studied at 3 business schools, has taught at 1, I never in a million years thought that what would bring me to Yale is the business of cannabis. But as Brendan Kennedy said this morning, extraordinary to see how quickly this industry has grown and evolved, and how substantial the conversation is as this industry is maturing. So for you, the business students who are trying to decide what you're going to do when you grow up, and for those of you who are still trying to figure out what you're going to do when you grow up, I hope you will look at this as an opportunity to recognize the truly extraordinary opportunity that legal cannabis represents. My name is Zhang Kagia. I am the Executive Vice President of Industry Analytics for New Frontier Data. And just quickly, for those of you who might not know us, New Frontier is a data analytics company that is exclusively focused on the legal cannabis industry. What does that mean? All we do is data, and all we do is data focused specifically in the cannabis industry. We work with savvy investors, sophisticated business operators, public policymakers, and industry regulators to understand not just where the industry is currently, but how consumer trends, the business environment, the regulatory environment are shaping the business, and what the industry is going to look like tomorrow. We, as a data-driven company, we're not trying to understand a singular aspect of the industry. We're really trying to understand all of it. And to do that, we source data from a whole host of data environments, from federal and state governments, everything from how cannabis use rates are evolving nationally to rates of driving incidents on our national highways. We get data from business operators, and not just what products consumers are selling. We've been looking at how much fertilizer is being sold in Colorado to grow cannabis. Fun fact, soil is an extraordinarily lucrative business in the cannabis space. We also get a lot of data from consumers, and we're really excited about finally being able to get some real visibility into how the consumer environment is evolving. We're no longer talking about cannabis consumers being a binary, you're either a consumer or you're not. We're no longer talking about cannabis consumers either just being medical, recreational. We're really drilling down into who the cannabis consumer is, what's driving the behavior, looking at the spectrum on one end of cannabis consumers who are using it to treat a specific medical condition, to the other end of people who are using it really just as a social accelerant to enhance their social experiences, and everything in between that includes wellness, that includes lifestyle, that includes holistic healing. And those nuances will shape both the products that are developed in the next iteration of this space, but also how those products are marketed and communicated to the end consumer. So in that context, we have an amazing panel here, and I want to get to the Q&A. So I'll very quickly contextualize this issue of race, diversity, gender inclusion in the cannabis industry based on some work that we've done, and specifically drawn from a study that New Frontier partnered with late last year with Women Grow, which provided extraordinary insight into the experiences and perspectives of women in the cannabis space. So first, cannabis consumers are a large, diverse, and growing community. It's been pretty extraordinary to see how cannabis use has increased over the past 7 or 8 years. Since 2009, 7.5 more million Americans became regular cannabis consumers. And now there are over 22 million Americans who fall within that bracket of regular cannabis use. It's important to note that there is a gender split there. Men use cannabis about twice the rates of that women do. And that's really important to understand because it begins to signal that there are differences in behavioral drivers that lead men and women to consume cannabis. And candidly to me, that's one of the major unexploited opportunities in this space. Women are a fast-growing community within the cannabis user base. In fact, use amongst women is growing faster than it is amongst men. But most of the products being developed currently are still really focused at men. And so as we talk about emerging opportunities in this space, this is certainly a significant and important one. Looking specifically at the racial breakdown of cannabis users, interestingly, cannabis use is actually pretty even, pretty consistent when you look across racial lines. Overall, nationally, you have about 9% of Americans indicate that they're regular cannabis users. And within most racial groups, you're looking at between 9 and 14% rates of use. I do find it curious that people who are a mixed race, 2 or more races, tend to use at significantly higher rates than anyone else. But by and large, one can look at this community and say, all right, people are using cannabis at about the same rates across racial lines. However, poor and minority communities have really borne the brunt of cannabis prohibition. The ACLU released a report in 2013 that was the most comprehensive look at cannabis-related arrests broken down by race. And the breakdown was principally between black and white because that's where the largest discrepancy has been. Nationally, you were 4 times more likely to be arrested if you were black than you were white for being a cannabis consumer or for a cannabis-related offense. Now, we've just seen that cannabis use rates are pretty consistent between the races, so that's a significant divide. When you look at individual states, in some states, you were 8.5 times more likely to be arrested. When you drill down into specific cities, in some cities you were 12 to 15 times more likely to be arrested. Think about that. It meant that it's not the kids at Yale who are getting busted for cannabis-related offenses, it's kids on the wrong side of the tracks. And the consequence and outcomes of this have been catastrophic. Because, when California was about to legalize, people were making the argument, well, people may still get arrested, but you don't really go to jail for cannabis. Nobody goes to jail for cannabis anymore. We actually looked at that. We did some work in California and found that, yes, people do still go to jail for cannabis-related offenses, even in a place as progressive as California. In California, African Americans make up 6% of the population. They made up nearly 1/4 of the people in jail for just cannabis-related offenses. And even if you aren't going to jail, just having that arrest record can penalize you very substantially because it makes it more difficult for you to get a job, for you to get housing, for you to get student loans. And so it becomes a yoke that sits on you or that you have to carry for the rest of your life if it's not expunged. And it's not without irony that one of the outcomes of this, because so many states are requiring clean records to obtain cannabis business licenses, is you are seeing much lower minority participation in the cannabis industry, and that's particularly related to this. And so we think creative policies are going to be needed to try and mitigate some of the outcomes and effects of the inequity in the way prohibition has been enforced. We have a couple of interesting examples from California, which really is the first state that is leading this idea of how to both recognize and address this inequity in the way prohibition has been enforced and its implications for who is participating in the cannabis industry. So California is doing two things, or cities in California are doing two things. Oakland is building an equity program. They're basically trying to ensure that amongst the business licenses that are being issued in the state, that there's a robust, concerted effort to ensure that minorities and African Americans in particular do have an opportunity to obtain business licenses in what has historically been a very diverse city, but where access to participate in this industry has been limited. And then you've got cities like San Francisco, which are basically saying, you know, if you've been arrested for a cannabis-related offense since, and I think they're going back to something like 1973, they're going to expunge and seal those records. Basically, they clean the books. That's profoundly powerful, because it doesn't just mean that these people can participate in the industry, it means that they can participate fully in the society. And while getting buy-in for this approach is going to be a challenge nationally, these are the sort of solutions that people, policymakers, regulators, and the public in general will need to entertain as we explore how to undo and mitigate the long-term effects of the inequity and prohibition. When we talk about diversity, we also need to talk about who is coming into the industry. And one of the aspects of the study that we did with Women Grow that I found really interesting, we asked nearly 2,000 participants, 2,000 people employed or working in the cannabis industry, what brought them into cannabis. And for an industry that is now starting to make some real money, you know, we really thought that, you know, the wealth creation would be a key driver. Turns out that's not the case. 75% of the people who said that it is the opportunity to effect change that brought them in, compared to less than half who said that it's wealth creation. Now, that's not to say that money's not important, but you know, this is an industry driven by people who see passion and cause in their work. And that's really important, because when we think about diversity, it also means that if you're a business owner, a business operator, perhaps traditional financial incentives might not be as catalytic to empowering your workforce as giving them the chance to work for causes, give them, you know, a few hours a month to go and do something that they truly believe in, give them an opportunity to get involved in missions that they feel strongly about. Understanding who your workforce is and what motivates them is going to be one of the really important aspects of how this industry grows, and that is also key to building a diverse workforce. Education is going to be key to achieving long-term a robust and diverse and inclusive industry. So what do we mean by that? As part of the survey, we asked, what are the big challenges you're facing as an organization achieving your diversity objectives? And interestingly, the two leading issues were, one, limited knowledge, like we don't know how to do it. It's an issue that is important to us, but we really don't know how to integrate diversity into our strategic plan, into our business. And then second was lack of corporate buy-in. Senior management just weren't paying attention to this issue, and because of that, the rest of the organization wasn't paying attention to this issue. As we think about this conversation within this community, I think we have to appreciate that there's a lot of good, well-meaning people who, when explained this issue, buy into it. They get it, and they're like, yeah, we should be paying more attention to it. That they're not doing it is because they don't, it's not because they don't care, they just don't know, or it's not front and center for them. And so I would urge some sensitivity in that, and that, you know, perhaps a carrot rather than a stick, to get people to pay attention to this issue, because it is not, I think there's a lot of powerfully motivated and well-intentioned people who are just busy, and this doesn't rise to the top of the issues that they're concerned about, but who would take steps if there was an easy way for them to get involved and to get proactive on this issue. And this is really important because diversity is really good for business. We asked on the survey, when evaluating a potential employer, how important is the diversity of the company to your selection of that employer? 70% of people said racial diversity, and 69% said gender diversity were important or very important. Having a diverse team makes you more attractive to the best and brightest. And if you're going to be competing with the Morgan Stanleys and JP Morgans for students who just graduated from Yale School of Management, well, cannabis is going to win hands down, but within cannabis, having a diverse team will make you more attractive than the competitor who is down the street from you. And not only that, it's actually good for the bottom line. 71% of the respondents to our survey believe that having a diverse team does positively impact the way business operations. And that's actually been borne out by the management science. Companies that have both racially and gender diverse teams outperform by margin companies that are more homogeneous in their structure. So even if you're not doing it out of the goodness of your own heart, even if you're not doing it as a social cause, do it because it actually has an impact on your bottom line. And in an industry which is growing very, very quickly, where the opportunities for substantial wealth creation are truly extraordinary, and which is getting more competitive, having a diverse team could be part of your winning edge. So, a few quick takeaways or summary. One, cannabis use transcends race, but unfortunately, prohibitions enforcement has really been borne by poor and minority communities. Second, this is an industry propelled by passion, and harnessing that passion means thinking creatively about who your employers are and what motivates them. Third, diversity is good for business. It's good for the bottom line. But to get there, more education is going to be needed to ensure that companies understand why this is important and how best to include it in their business plans. And then finally, know your audience. So coming back to this, my initial point, that this is that there's significant differences by gender, there's significant differences by who is consuming and why. Within those differences is opportunity. And I hope you, as you explore opportunities in this space, as you explore businesses in this space, you'll consider how to harness those differences to your advantage, because we think they are going to be catalytic to the ways in which companies compete, grow, and ultimately become successful in this space. With that, I'll turn it over to Gia, but really want to thank Gia and Women Grow for the study that we did together. Thank you, Yale School of Management. I'm looking forward to the panel.
Because we're running a little bit behind schedule, I'm just going to go through this quickly. I know why I say your name incorrectly. It's because you've had my last 3 letters, and I've always rejected Gia, and it's G. So, yeah, that's it. So my apologies. Panelists, thank you so much. If you don't mind just quickly introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go right into the questions. I'll start with you, Jesse.
All right, real quickly, my name is Jesse Horton. I am a cannabis cultivator, dispensary owner, and before getting into the cannabis industry, I was an engineer, but before that, I was very much dealing with the racial implications of cannabis prohibition and being arrested multiple times for cannabis possession, and also my father being arrested and spending 7 years in prison for cannabis distribution. So I've come out really kind of full scale.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ebele Efedigbo. I'm one of the co-founders and co-executive directors of the Hood Incubator. Basically, our mission is to help increase the participation of Black and Brown communities within the legal marijuana industry. And I guess my last bio tidbit is I'm a 2016 graduate of this Yale School of Management. So it's good to be back in the classroom.
Hi everyone, my name is Mona Zhang. I'm the editor of Word on the Tree. It's a daily cannabis newsletter. It's everything you need to know about cannabis delivered into your inbox daily. And I'm also a freelance journalist covering cannabis policy, business, culture, everything.
Okay. Hey, hello everybody, and thanks for coming out. My name is Marvin Washington. I'm in the cannabis space with 5 different companies. I got into this, and I keep calling it space, but it's not. Cannabis industry. I got into this industry about 4 years ago, particularly with the patent that the government had in relationship to concussions, which Kiva mentioned, 6630507, and then I did a deep dive into cannabis because I don't smoke it. I didn't know the difference between THC or TLC at the time, but now I do, and it's evolved to working with athletes. I have a federal lawsuit against Jeff Sessions and both body of Congress and the DOJ. And then my last platform is diversity, because this was a $7 billion industry last year, and minorities were definitely represented when it was illegal in the black market. Now it's in the green market. I definitely want us to participate.
Thank you. So John, I'm going to start with you first. Based on your presentation, in your findings, have arrests changed post-prohibition racially?
They have, very, very significantly. And Washington, D.C., which is where we're based, is a great example of this. We've seen arrests for cannabis-related offenses drop at this point about 96% post-legalization. It's been transformative. Now, you do see and smell cannabis everywhere, but the cops have really taken this idea of cannabis being legal to heart. Interestingly, though, there's been a very dramatic decline in arrests for possession, for cultivation, for use. But there's been a spike in arrests for public use, so people being arrested for consuming in public. And the racial split on arrests for public use are exactly the same as they were pre-legalization. So the total number of people being arrested is still the same, is dramatically lower, but the disparity in arrests between African Americans and whites in particular is virtually identical to what it was pre-legalization, and underscores why there needs to be kind of action on trying to create greater equity in the way the law is being enforced.
Thank you. So, Ebele, I want to hop over to you now. You mentioned a little bit about the Hood Incubator, and I'd love for you to give a little bit more detail about that, based on what your organization does, why you choose to do this work, how you got into it.
Okay. This is awkward. Yeah, so like I said, the Hood Incubator, we're a nonprofit organization focused on the cannabis industry and making sure that Black and brown communities in particular have a stake in this industry. Similar to what Marvin just said, like, as the industry has been underground all these decades and years, Black and brown communities have been a key part of the industry. We've been in this industry, whether it was by choice or by circumstance, and we have taken on the vast majority of the risk associated with marijuana prohibition. So now, from our perspective as the Hood Incubator, it makes sense that our community should be getting a big reward, that stock market adage, more risk, more reward. This is the same situation here. So that's really what's driving our work, seeing the way that our communities have been devastated with cannabis prohibition, and now we want to make sure that we can actually turn this plant that has been used as a weapon into a tool to actually help us repair our communities and build toward the future. So I'll say a little bit more about what we do, and then why I do it. But in order to achieve our mission, we organize our work into three key areas of work. So community organizing, policy advocacy, and economic development. And we believe that at this moment in time, all three of those areas of work are necessary. And we kind of see them as building on to each other. So the community organizing piece is really around, it's just what it sounds like, but more specifically, helping to bring communities together to have these critical conversations. Like, as a Black person in the industry, you don't have the same luxury to just be running around, yelling from the rooftops that you're a cultivator, or, going to city council meetings to advocate like some other folks in industry have been able to do, particularly in California. California is a unique market in a way, because of the way that the gray area worked. And there are a lot of folks who have a very big advantage in the industry now that it's legalizing because, I mean, frankly, either their skin color or their pocketbook was able to protect them from 1996 until today to be able to keep building their businesses. But if you're a Black person in the industry, most likely you wound up in jail. Your first mover advantage was go to jail, as opposed to your first mover advantage being, oh, I have $1 million advantage over the next person coming in. And so our community organizing is just getting folks together and talking about that issue, helping to break down the stigma, the isolation, the trauma that comes along with the drug war, and just really galvanizing people to take advantage of this opportunity that we have right now. And then that leads into the policy advocacy work. Nationally, all these policies and frameworks are just coming online. The ink has not dried. And so we feel it's imperative that we take this window of opportunity to be shaping how does the industry look, how does the industry function. And two keywords that we use, diversity and inclusion are, you know, the buzzwords of this time, but we actually want to go a little bit deeper. We talk about centering and equity. So as opposed to just including somebody on something that's presumably already been built, already been formulating, how are we actually centering the communities most harmed from the get-go and making sure that whatever the industry looks like, it has the communities that have been most harmed at the center of the model, not just adding us in later. And then on the diversity piece, we like to say equity as opposed to diversity. Not to say that diversity and inclusion aren't important, but again, just going a little bit deeper. You can have a bunch of people in the room, but like, is everybody getting the same access, the same benefits, the same return on investments? Or are you just a Black face at the table, the token Black person that's not actually, you know, getting your just dues? And so we want to make sure that our communities are centered and that the conversation is about equity. So that's what we do on the policy level. And then we use that to build up to economic development. Ultimately, like John said, this is a huge economic windfall. Projected to be a $20 billion industry within the next couple of years. And so we want to make sure that we're creating the pipelines for our folks to have access to that, whether it's as owners, whether it's as employees, patients and consumers, or even if you're someone from a community that's been harmed, you don't want anything to do with the marijuana plant itself, but you want to make sure that, you know, industry taxes or whatever are coming back to benefit your community through education programs, community reinvestment, et cetera. So that's our work in a nutshell. You want me to talk about the why or just save that for, I know we're short on time.
Can I come back to it?
Yeah,
Just
for sure.
I'm watching the time, and you just said something that I think segues well to Jesse. So Jesse, as a business owner yourself, how do we level the playing field? I mean, we've got challenges against communities of color. You yourself, a person of color, as well as a business owner in the cannabis space. Can you tell us, you know, one, it's clear the challenges, but how do we level that?
Yeah, excellent. So I was remiss to mention that I'm the co-founder of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. That's the largest association, trade association focused on ensuring, like a Hood Incubator, that people of color have some way to benefit from the cannabis industry. And within doing that, of course, we look at a lot of the barriers and hurdles and issues, and I deal with them as a business owner. And I think that really my goal as the founder of MCBA and when I was the chairman of that organization was really about focusing on small business development, small business opportunity. I don't think that there's anything that is necessary within bringing more people of color into the industry and making sure that they thrive and are successful that is different, very different from making sure that small businesses are successful and have opportunities. For example, fair taxes, fair regulations, lowering these crazy fees, right? License limits, all of these different things that we do to try to compress the industry out of fear, right? That it's going to go out and poison our kids are things that ultimately hurt small businesses and as a consequence, most definitely hurt people of color, people of lower socioeconomic backgrounds. I think that unfortunately a lot of people think that there aren't a lot of people of color because of arrest rates, right? That's the first thing a lot of people say, and I think that's very unfortunate. Even though we do see the high arrest rates, there are a lot of people of color who want to get into the industry, who have clean records, even some who have the means and the opportunity, and if you look a little bit deeper, it's other issues that we need to attack in order to make sure that we make a dent, like some of those.
Well, I was going to actually just jump into that, but maybe Marvin can answer that for me. What do you think some of those issues and challenges are that we're up against?
You know, to me, in 2012, when Colorado and Oregon and Washington, those Western states, went legal, that's when the race started. And now that it's moving east of the Mississippi and you're getting into the population centers, I think our participation is going to go up. One of the things that I'm doing is trying to bring this to the community because there's a lot of trepidation behind this plant in the minority community. And one of the biggest influence in the minority community is the church. And I want to take this to the church and educate them about the medicinal benefits of the plant and the economic benefits for their community. I think we're going to make progress, like I said, as it goes into the population centers like Trenton, New Jersey, like Newark, New Jersey, like Philadelphia, like DC. Eventually it's going to get to New York and Philadelphia and what have you, and going down in Florida. The participation is going to be up. I just think it needs to be education. And this industry can be a level playing field for men, women, and minorities where, you know, a woman can make $1 and a man can make $1. And so, as Jesse likes to say, it's not doing business as usual. Let's do a better business. And I think we have this opportunity at hand.
Absolutely. Thank you. So actually, Mona, I'll jump over to you just based on, as a journalist, from your coverage, are you seeing more organizations of color working together really to address perhaps some of the issues that Marvin and, well, basically you all have mentioned, right? So are you seeing collaborations more? Are we still working very silo?
Yeah, I am seeing more collaboration. I mean, obviously we have so many great organizations on this panel here, and you see organizations really come out and advocate for better equity programs. Like in Oakland, Supernova Women really showed up and tried to make the equity program even more equitable than it was originally proposed. And you see a lot of stakeholders just making their voice heard and engaging with the legislators on these types of things. And I think the good things that come out of that type of political engagement is that really key pieces as far as policy goes. With equity programs, I think a really key piece that Oakland has and that LA even took to the next level is creating incentives for general applicants to work with equity applicants. So if you're a general applicant in Oakland and you incubate an equity applicant, which basically means giving them a free lease for 3 years for their business, that helps you with your application with the city. In LA, it's on so many different fronts: licensing, compliance, real estate too. So kind of what John was saying at the beginning, where there are a lot of interests, private interests that might not care enough about this issue to do something about it. When stakeholders engage with their lawmakers to create the right incentives, you get a lot more collaboration going on.
Good. So I want to stay with you for a moment because there's a question that I really want to get across. Can you speak a little bit about not only the policy measures that are more effective, but also there's a culture clash, sorry. And now we're beginning to see more Wall Streeters entering into the space versus the historical pioneers, right? And those that have been disenfranchised. So can you speak a little bit about that, of what you're beginning to see in the space now in terms of that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, this was something that I've been covering for a couple years because there is a really apparent culture clash. I live in New York, and there are a lot of cannabis events that are focused on finance, and a lot of Wall Street people go to them. And at a lot of these events, I'm quite offended to hear people, deride cultivators, make fun of people who have been in the black market for a long time, describe them as criminals. And meanwhile, they want to profit off of this industry. So I think, creating those incentives I was just talking about can help bridge that gap. And really, people have to learn that, Wall Street people, I think they're starting to learn that you can't just drop into this industry and expect to make a lot of money. I've heard a lot of stories from Okay, so first of all, people think that there's this bright line between the black market and the legal market, and it's not the case. You know, there are tons of people in the legal market who used to be big players in the black market. And these people, they have all the relationships, and they have a lot of business savvy. And a Wall Street person will come to the industry and say, oh, I'm just going to throw a bunch of money at this thing. Why aren't I successful? And they'll go to those players and ask them, why are you so successful? And those players will say, I've been in this industry for decades.
Well, I was going to point out, so it's interesting. Marvin mentioned education. You're now talking about Wall Streeters that sound like they're lacking education in this space.
Yeah.
And people are initially coming into the space saying, I have a stack of money and make me some money, like triple it.
I'm a legit businessman. I know how to do business.
Right.
But, you know, the cannabis industry is kind of special. You know, it's at this like weird point where it's moving from the black market into the legal market. And so, I mean, hopefully with these equity programs, as they spread around the country, we can have more people working together and learning from each other and really valuing the expertise that people who have been in the industry for a long time can bring to the table.
Which is, now I will jump to Jesse. You have a question about the impacts, how this has impacted the war on drugs. And, you know, I mean, and mass incarceration, which John spoke about earlier. But now we're beginning to see legalization. We're beginning to see corporations come in. And now, you know, you've got I like to call them the transitioners from the black side into the legal side, right? And not black color us, but black market. Can you address for us, you know, what are we seeing? I mean, is it the same, or are we?
As far as in the legal market or
The war on drugs, I'm sorry. Are we seeing a decrease, or are we pushing harder against it, or?
Yeah, I think that I think as a country we're kind of at a realization point where we're really understanding the true implications of the war on drugs and what that has meant for mass incarceration. And some people, like across the country, congressmen, are now recognizing mass incarceration and how it has truly affected people of color. So I think that that's one of the reasons that the cannabis industry has come to a place of legitimacy, is because of the fact that people understand how much of a role that played in mass incarceration as a whole. And it's astronomical, really, when you look at what the cannabis arrests and the people who got arrested, did they smell cannabis, right? Or what are the links to cannabis potentially there? And it's really huge, all the people that were arrested as a result of it. So I think naturally, certainly we're seeing an awakening of our country through cannabis legalization, and it's helping without a doubt. But as John mentioned earlier, we're still seeing those same rates of people of color being arrested for these issues. And one main thing I think that is contributing to that is the lack of social consumption, right? You mentioned people that are smoking outside, right? Typically people of color, people of lower socioeconomic backgrounds are leasing, right? They don't own their homes, or they're in Section 8 housing and getting housing assistance. At the same time, cannabis legalization comes into play and people are now allowed to consume. However, they can't go to a club. They can't go to a legal place. Where are they going? They can't go to their home. They may lose their children or lose their housing. Maybe they're in that park. Maybe they're in their car. And as a result of those things, you're seeing maybe an increase in those types of arrests or a focus on that because now we're more exposed. So I think there's definitely as a whole an awakening, but there's definitely little nuances and things that we have to understand and do better as we bring in these policies and regulations to ensure that we don't repeat some of these same issues.
Are we seeing, are legal business owners of color, are they, I'll just come out and say it. I mean, are they, what's the word I want to say?
Being singled out maybe? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to like be PC about it, but yeah, like, are they being judged about? I mean, are they judged more harshly? Are they? I just learned, you know, of a career opportunity in terms of what were you talking about? Your help me out. What's the word I'm thinking? Tuesday. You are having what at your business, Shonda Macias? Yes. Inspectors. So, and the reason why I say that, because I've been really thinking about that since then, and I was like, wow, inspectors, imagine that. Exactly. Are people of color who are business owners in the cannabis industry held to a higher degree, of which we've seen in other industries as well? So are we facing that here?
Most certainly, and I think the first place
Thank
that
you.
happens is the licensing process.
Right.
And on the board of directors of MCBA, we have a consultant who has gone in every state and gotten licenses for almost every type of group that's out there looking for licenses. And he has said that he wrote one license in Maryland for a group of primarily people of color, and wrote almost the same exact license with a group who were primarily white individuals. And the people of color, right, they didn't even score in the top 10. I think they were number 20. But the other group, right, got a license and they may have been number 2 or 3. So it's starting there. And then, of course, it starts within inspections. As Shonda mentioned, I'm going through a number of them right now. I don't think that I'm dealing with any particular racial issues, but I can definitely see how there are potentials, or there is a potential for people who are going through those very, very subjective processes to get caught up in what people feel about the industry or what people feel about that particular community. So without a doubt, the subjectivity that is involved in getting licenses and being successful, getting through those processes are definitely open to some of the same issues that we dealt with.
But Jesse, you know you have had cannabis cups, you all have winning hybrids all over Oregon, and you have a project and investment, finding people to invest in your business in comparison to your counterpart is almost impossible. Now, that is the disparity we're talking about. You are highly competent, you're known in this industry, you're at Yale University, but you can't get funding for your business?
No, that's
I was going to say thank you. Thank you.
Oh, it's very true. Part of MCBA, the last piece, policy, education, and connection, is connecting people to resources. I don't have that typical network, right, of my family who has money or people that I know. And as a result, right, these typical venture capitalists maybe aren't as comfortable with people of color, maybe don't know people of color, maybe don't understand or aren't as trustworthy. However, as she mentioned, I'm constantly, you know, at the top of the cultivation class in Oregon. I do a lot of work in the industry. I do a lot of work with policy and regulation. I'm very educated and understand the business, but it's extremely difficult for me to get people to listen to me whenever I want to talk about my business opportunity.
John, why don't you jump in?
Just a quick point on why this is so important. This issue of capital funding is so important. Cannabis is federally legal, which means that most banks aren't willing to touch the industry, which means that you don't get business loans the way you would if you're trying to start a business in any other sector of the economy.
Not that that helped with us in the
Well,
past.
yeah. It does help
Same
our
issues,
business.
yeah.
It's just made it back much worse. And so if the industry is largely funded by private capital, if the industry is almost exclusively funded by private capital, if people who have access to high net worth individuals or who have high net worth individuals within their personal networks, or who are 1 or 2, 3 degrees of separation from people with high net worth, that are able to get the capital required to get these licenses. And particularly as the industry has moved from west to east, the cost of setting up a business has grown up dramatically. I was talking to a guy in Colorado who told me that he set up his first dispensary with $5,000 in a jar of cannabis. Those days are long gone.
Can you say that one more time, that last sentence?
He set up his first dispensary with $5,000 in a jar of cannabis. Nat's taking
She's like notes.
yeah. Nat's taking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to get these businesses up and running and to keep them running. The run time to get it profitable is getting longer because it's becoming a much more competitive and commercially sophisticated space. And so you need a lot of money to get going. And if you don't have access to that kind of capital, then you've lost the race before the race has begun.
Which, now, I want to circle back because it even touches on the Hood Incubator. So if we talk about repurposing power and privilege, and based on what we've just discussed, you know, what does allyship look like in our space? Where do we find them? Who are they? And not that they're wearing a badge like myself, but I'm just saying, like, where do we go?
I think those two keywords that you just said are the key. What does allyship look like in this industry? It is about conversations about power and about privilege. We just had a whole background of, you know, the ways that communities of color are not privileged in this industry, and the privileges that come with either being in the majority race or just being a high net worth individual or just having access to capital. And so part of it, what it means to be an ally, it has to be more than just talk. It has to be a willingness to actually relinquish some of that power and repurpose some of that privilege that you have been granted, you know, not based on merit, but just based on, you know, circumstance, where you were born, what family you were born into, what race you happened to be born. And so that's really what it takes. So whether that's, you know, so I think a good example, we just started a partnership with a cannabis company called eSolutions. And they're basically a tech company. Like, they're essentially like the Uber of marijuana. They're, you know, you go on their app, you order stuff. So they've been getting highly capitalized, like round after round. I think one of the stories about them, they're like bleeding $1 million a month and as they're starting up. But we recently got a partnership with them, recognizing the power that they have to be an ally because of the level of access to capital that they have, because of the influence that they're building, particularly in the California market. And so we're working with them to see how can you actually partner with the Hood Incubator and help bring some of the infrastructure and resources that you have to bear on actually ensuring equity for other folks. So just like they're going through $1 million a month just building their businesses, they recently made a $1 million commitment to back equity initiatives in California over the next 3 years. So that means that, okay, they're going to have to take that $1 million that they maybe could have invested somewhere else to grow their profits even more, but they recognize that they have a duty to actually repurpose some of what they've been able to amass to make sure that communities who don't have that access can actually get a leg up. And so we're working with them. One of the first projects that we're working on is what we're calling a Cannabis Equity Manifesto. And so it's really going to be a project that's focusing on the everyday cannabis business. Like John had a slide in there that showed why aren't people getting more involved with diversity and equity in industry, and part of it was that businesses just don't know where to start. Right. And so we want to work to kind of create a playbook. Okay, I'm X, Y, and Z business. I want to be more equitable, but I don't know what I'm doing. We want to work with ease, using some of their resources and their technology data collection capacity to start doing some of that work and using that to help shape the field at large. So that's just an example of what it means. You have to be willing to forego an opportunity that maybe, you know, could make you a little extra money, but you recognize that I have this privilege, I have this power. What am I actually going to do with that to do something for the better and not just for myself? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Keep going. So I'm paying attention to the time, and there's 3 more questions that I want to ask, but I'm going to go through this quick. I want to leave us on a high. What are we excited about? Right, I'm trying, right? Pun intended.
Pass it over here.
Right. I want to leave you elevated. But we need to share with them, what are we excited about in this space, especially from the diversity and, you know, equality side? What are we happy about? I mean, I'll start at the end and then bring it down. Is that okay?
I see more groups stepping up, trying to educate our communities about it. And the fear and trepidation that was associated with this plant even 4 or 5 years ago in our community, those walls are going down, and I think the arrow is pointing up. Just get involved, and because only 10% of Americans know anything about cannabis, man. Educate your friends and your family and what have you. Mm-hmm. And this is a wonderful space. I'm happy that I found it.
Good. Mona?
I'm excited for the trend of social justice being something that is discussed within the context of policy. You know, you have San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle expunging cannabis crimes. You have this kind of discussion at the state level. And that wasn't really a discussion that was going on when Colorado and Oregon legalized it. I mean, Colorado still has a felony ban on nonviolent drug convictions from entering the industry. So it's great to see that lawmakers are talking about this and instituting programs that will help remedy the wrongs of the drug war.
Okay, Ebele?
And I'm excited about the precedent that the marijuana industry can set for the country and really the world at large. Like, this opportunity to create an industry where the rules of engagement are fundamentally different, where the way that we orient ourselves toward equity and social justice is like really part and parcel of the industry. I think that if we do this right in the marijuana industry, that's going to have ricochet effects to any other American industry,
absolutely.
existing industries and any new industries that come online. So I think there's really a big opportunity to just like fundamentally change what business means in this country.
Excellent. Jesse?
I'm excited that I get to grow and sell weed legally. From being arrested for a seed to spending all my college savings just so I can go over to Amsterdam and sit and legally smoke, to now being able to pour all my passions and my skills and everything I learned in school to a job that, you know, really has, you know, all these opportunities is
A
just
job that you
amazing.
highly like.
Yes.
John, I'm going to change it up on you because I really want to get this in. What can communities of color do to create growth and sustainability in this industry?
Believe in the opportunity that this industry represents.
On that note, folks, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the panel.
Great close.